Hi guys, and welcome back to Subtractive Synthesis 101 with Sonic Academy. In this video we're going to continue looking at modulation. In the last video we took a look at what modulation is, so we looked at LFOs and some envelopes, and in this video we're going to take a look at how you assign or set up modulation in a couple of synths. So first of all we'll start taking a look at Anna, and we've got, there's a couple of different places where you can assign modulation. You've got two freely assignable modulation matrices over here, and then we've got the envelopes that we've already looked at. One is a hardwired to your filter, another one is hardwired to your amp, and then the third one is free, and you can assign it to a number of different things in this box here. So we'll take a look at that in a second. You've also got two LFOs. We've looked at LFOs before, and then in Anna you've also got something called the G envelope, which we'll take a look at as well. And I'm going to keep the sounds themselves fairly simple in these examples so you can hear what's going on very clearly. So we'll take a quick look at what some of these things do. So we should have, we should have a saw wave just set up. Okay, so these two here do exactly the same thing. And what you're going to have in most modulation setups is you're going to have a source, a modulation source. So that's the device that's creating the modulation. So it could be an LFO, or it could be an envelope, or it could be a keyboard velocity, or it could be your mod wheel down here. See, I've got my mod wheel on my controller keyboard. See, that could be a source for modulation. And then the target is the thing being modulated. So if we set something up quickly here, we will assign or choose LFO1 as the source, and LFO1 is over here. And we will set the target as, let's just set it up as a filter because that's nice and easy to hear. So we'll choose filter 1 cutoff. You can see it in the list here. Now each synth you use will have a different list in the source and target depending on what the program has chosen to give you to use. But in this example we use the cutoff. We might use this a lot just to show you how you set these things up. Now next to the source and the target you've got an amount. This is the amount of modulation applied. So let's see what this is doing. Okay, that's sweeping the filter up and down, and that's based on this LFO rate. So if I change the rate as this is playing, you should hear that get slower or faster. Okay, in conjunction with this amount here, this is the amount of modulation being applied. Over on the LFO control, you've got depth, and that controls the amplitude of the LFO, so how high up and down the LFO is acting. So if I bring this all the way down, you should hear this is a far more, even if I have this switched all the way up, it's going to be a far more subtle effect. So it's only going up and down a little bit, and then if we sweep this control up, you'll hear the amplitude or the height of the LFO getting much bigger. So let's try that. Okay, so that's using a freely assignable modulation matrix to use the LFO to sweep the filter, but we can actually switch this off, and we can do that with the LFO itself. So within the LFO section you've got targets as well, so I can choose the same cutoff here, filter cutoff, choose that, and this tiny dial here is the same as this dial here. It's the amount of modulation. So as I turn this up, you'll hear the same effect. Okay, so let's switch this off again now. The next one we'll have a look at is another envelope. This is the freely assignable envelope, and we already know how an ADSR envelope works. We know what the controls do. So let's choose the I'll tell you what we can do, which will be quite interesting. We'll choose LFO1's rate as the destination or the target. Now if we switch LFO1 back on to control filter 1 cutoff, as we did before, we've got the rate somewhere in the middle, and what we'll do is we will use a medium attack, And what this is going to do, as we turn this amount up, this is the amount of modulation. So this envelope here, is going to be used to alter the rate of LFO1, which in turn is controlling the cutoff of filter 1. So what you'll hear is the LFO rate will increase. Let's just turn all the other ones down for now. The LFO rate will increase based on this attack value here. So let's turn this up. So you can hear that. Let's make that a bit longer so it's a bit easier to hear. Okay, so this attack now is quite long. It's displayed, you can actually see it in the little readout down here. It tells you how long that's going to be. So if we choose 7.5 seconds, that means the attack portion is going to be 7.5 seconds long. So this LFO rate, which is our target, is going to increase for 7.5 seconds based on the amount of modulation we set. So let's turn this up a little bit more and press the note down again. And because the amount's quite high now, the LFO gets quite fast, so it almost becomes a kind of audible frequency. So what we'll do here, these three controls here, they control the slope of the envelope. So you choose this one because this is a linear slope and it's a little bit easier to hear what's going on. So let's listen to this again. In fact, let me just turn the amount down because it'll be easier to hear. Okay, so we already know that decay, it defines the downward slope of this control here. So if I turn the decay up a little bit, and then sustain, we know will sustain the LFO rate at a certain amount, and then the release will alter the LFO rate on note release. So let's try this. Okay, so that's coming back down again. Now we're in the sustain portion, and as I let go, we don't hear anything because I've got no amp release. So let's turn that up. Try this again. Okay, so now we're back at the sustain portion, and as I let go of the note, you can slowly hear it start to slow down again over time. Okay, so that was quite a little convoluted example there. Let me initialize this patch again. And unique to Anna is the G envelope. And this is just like a line of automation. What you do is you right click on the line here and you can add more points or nodes. Okay, so let's do this. So you can see a shape here. This looks like automation within DAW, so you should be familiar with this. And what we'll do is we will choose a rate of, hang on, let's just sync. If we click this button here, it syncs to the DAW. So we will choose, you can see the readout here showing us what we're choosing here. If I go down to 1 to 1, so that's 1 bar. Now you can loop this envelope, switch that on and off, or this will re-trigger the envelope every time you hit the note down. But I will choose, we might as well choose the filter again because that's easiest to hear. So let's choose filter 1 cutoff. Let's pull it down to halfway so we get some kind of change either way. And we'll turn the amount all the way up. And phase, we already know what phase does, so that changes the point at which the the envelope will start along this timeline. So let's hear what this does. So you can hear that filter is following this line across 1 bar because that's the rate we set it to. If we make this a little bit more extreme, I'm not sure how many nodes you can add. Let's just try and add a few more. Put one there, and we'll put one here. So let's see how that sounds. So you could get quite creative with that. Let me reset it just so you can, let's try something else. So we could just do a straight old ramp, and this will increase the filter over 1 bar. you could choose any shape you want here, depending on how many nodes you add. So that's quite a useful addition to modulation. And that can be used very creatively. Okay, so that's the basics of modulation in ANA. And the next one we're going to look at is good old Sylenth, or Sylenth, however you pronounce it. Now, all of Sylenth's modulation is at the bottom here, all in one big section. And you've got almost exactly the same kinds of options as you had with ANA. So you've got two freely assignable envelopes here. And then in the middle, you've got two LFOs. Let me just initialize this patch. Boom, there you go. So you've got two LFOs in the middle. And then you've got four sets of what they call miscellaneous modulation matrices, whatever you call them. And we'll start off with the envelopes on the left, and we'll do the same thing. We'll use the filter as an example. Let's turn this up. Am I back on ANA still? Yeah, I keep doing this, don't I? Okay, so let's put the filter in the middle. And we'll do the same thing again. In the case of Sylenth, on each envelope, you've got two possible destinations. Both these do exactly the same thing. So you can choose two different destinations for the envelope and then alter the amount that's sent for modulation. Now, one thing to note is if you turn the dials clockwise, you get positive modulation. And if you turn them anti-clockwise, you get negative modulation. So it's up to you how you want to use these. So let's try it with the filter cutoff. And we'll do the same kind of curve as we did before. So something like this. And then let's give it plenty of release this time, so that we, plenty of amp release, so that we can hear the release of the modulation envelope as well. And let's turn the modulation up and listen to what that sounds like. Let's pull the cutoff down so we can hear it a bit better. Okay, so if we pull the attack all the way down, okay, that means the filter is going to open up straight away. If we pull the sustain down and we pull the release down, and we're just going to use the decay to create like a plucky sound. And in this case, we don't need the release anymore. So because we're only just using the decay portion, if you remember back to when we looked at envelopes, the decay is the amount of time it takes the signal to go from 100% back down to the sustain level. So because we've got the sustain level set down to 0, all the decay is doing is telling the filter cutoff in this case, because that's what we've got the destination set to, how long it takes to get back down to 0. So if we keep pulling the decay on this envelope down, you'll hear the note getting pluckier and pluckier. Okay, so that's one use of the modulation envelope here. So let's clear this one again. And we'll take a look at Sylenth's LFOs. They're almost exactly the same as ANA. But again, you've got two destinations as you've got in ANA as well. So we'll do the same thing. We'll use cutoff A, which is the filter cutoff of this page. And let's make it quite fast this time. So 1/16. And again, gain is LFO amplitude. So how high up and down the LFO is sweeping. And this control here is how much modulation you want applied. So let's turn this up. Okay, another control in Sylenth is this free button. And what that means is instead of the LFO starting at the beginning of the phase each time, the LFO just runs freely at the background. So it's kind of like the same way that you can re-trigger or not re-trigger your oscillators. And then lastly, on Sylenth, you've got the freely assignable modulation matrices over here. So you can use velocity, for example, to control cutoff, like we've done that before. So let's give this some value. And what will happen now is the harder I hit the note, the higher the cutoff value will be. Okay, and we could also, using the same matrix here, we could assign, what else should we do? I mean, this, you'd probably not use this for anything, but we can just assign this to pitch as well. So the harder we hit the note, the lower the note goes. Not sure why you'd ever use that, but it's there if you want to. But you can, obviously, you can do something more useful with this matrix. You could use LFO1 to alter the pitch of oscillator A or page A. So if we go back to this oscillator, we've got pitch, the LFO rate. If we switch that off 3, we've got this set to 16th still, which is useful. The gain is quite high, so let's push this down, because that's going to swing up and down quite violently. And then just push this value up a little bit, and you'll get a little bit of a vibrato effect here now. And that's actually used quite a lot within lead sounds. So they're the basics of silent. It's all fairly simple. And the next one we will look at is serum, because serum does things slightly differently. You've got a matrix in the same way that you have on Anna and Silent. If we click this tab here, the matrix, it gives you, I think it might be 16 slots to assign modulation. And you can do the same thing again, and I'm going to preempt myself here and choose serum this time so we can hear what I'm doing. So let's go back and switch the filter on again, because that's the easiest way to hear what's going on. And what you do in serum is you choose your source. So we'll use LFO1 again, and choose your destination, which will be filter cutoff, as we've done before. And let's give it some value. So this is modulation amount, like we've seen before. But serum, and it's quite useful because you can visually see the LFO rate here. So with serum, your modulation controls are all along the bottom here, which is quite handy. So we've seen LFO1 in action before, and we've seen the rate dial and what this does. So let's turn this up to 16th note like we did before. And we can apply some more modulation. But one extra control that you've got on the serum as well is that you've got an auxiliary source over here. So what I could do, for example, is I could choose the modulation wheel as another source for modulation. Now, when I don't have the modulation wheel pushed up, we don't get any modulation. But when I do push it up, this source here will control the amount of the source prior to it. So as I push the modulation wheel up, you can see the modulation wheel going up down here. I'm going to use my controller keyboard. You'll hear the modulation values that we set come into effect. So that's quite useful. Now what I'll do in serum is I'll initialize this preset, because it's got quite a good trick up its sleeve, which makes programming very, 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 very fast. I'll turn the filter back on. Now, if I want to assign LFO1 to the filter cutoff, I can use the matrix like I just showed you, but what I can also do is I can click here where this little cross is, and I can drag it up to the cutoff button and let go. And that means the LFO is now automatically set to the cutoff. So that's really fast and that's really handy. And this tiny little slot here, this tiny little round circle, if I pull this up and down, the blue line around the cutoff knob defines the area which the modulation applies to. So you can, I think you can see this in animation. Yeah, so you can see a little blue dot going backwards and forwards, and that's really, really handy for kind of fine-tuning your modulation in serum. And you can do the same thing with velocity. So if I then choose velocity to act on cutoff as well, what it'll do is, if I pull this down a little bit, so this, remember, this is the amount of modulation applied from this source. Where the blue line starts here, that'll be 0 velocity, and here will be maximum velocity. And depending on how hard I hit the note, the filter will open up accordingly. In fact, let's just unassign LFO1 for a second. I think, yeah, it's assigned here. So let's switch that off so we can hear this in action a bit better. Okay. And again, Serum gives you quite nice visual feedback. So this velocity curve here, if I hit the note really lightly, you get a value down here. And if I hit it really hard, you can see the value up here. And depending on where I hit the note on this velocity curve, the filter will open or close at this value. So if I turn this filter all the way down and then turn the amount of modulation all the way up, so the velocity affects the whole filter curve, you can see what's happening. I mean, that could be quite an expressive patch you create using that kind of modulation. So there's a rough idea of how you apply modulation in 3 different synths. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to kind of have a look at the manual. I know it's tedious, but sometimes it helps. Because if you look at something like Native Instruments Massive, Massive has this drag and drop modulation like Serum does. And for example, there's another synth called Synth Master, where you can right click on modulation sources to give it a modulation. You can right click on destinations. So for example, if you right click on your filter cutoff knob, you can do it here as well. Actually, I didn't know this. Right, that's interesting. I can show you this right now. So let's clear this value. See, we learn as we go. If I right click on the cutoff knob here, I can then give it a modulation source automatically. So again, you can apply the LFO to the cutoff by right clicking on the control itself. So the point of me saying this is that each synth is going to have its own way of creating and treating modulation and how you route it together. So that's quite an important thing to learn in each synth that you use. So what we will do now, we've kind of gone through all the components of the synth. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about effects. I mentioned before, they're not strictly part of the synthesis engine, but there are things that you can do with effects built into synths that are difficult or impossible to do with third-party effects. So it's still worth looking at the effects within synths. So that's what we'll do in the next video, and I will see you there.